Hey everyone, Neely here, host of Model Minority Uniquely American. And today I wanted to bring you a very special collaboration I've done with Project Voice. Now, for those of you who don't know, Project Voice is a podcast much like my own, spearheaded by Asian women and non-binary folks that discusses all kinds of social issues and Asian-specific topics. It's a really great group of people, and I highly suggest you go check them out on Facebook under the name Project Voice. So, today we're going to be jumping in to one of the most fascinating topics of the Asian community, and one that's quite honestly very close to my heart. For those of you who know me, you may have known me as somebody who worked in government and studied political science, and yet, even to me, Asian political involvement is something of an enigma. For this episode, we wanted to find out a little bit more about what Asian political involvement looks like, and then explore why it is that Asians get this rep of being apolitical. So, without further ado, on my end at Model Minority and in collaboration with Project Voice, we are excited to present to you today's episode, Enigma, the political lives of Asian Americans. I wanted to start by breaking down exactly what Asian political involvement, or lack thereof, looks like in the United States. According to a 2019 op-ed in the Washington Post by David Blyer, titled "Politicians Often Overlook Asian American Voters, They Shouldn't, Especially in 2020," many different political efforts aimed at racial minorities, whether in the election of President Obama or otherwise, have failed to include Asian voters. The article states that 65% of the Asian American community is Democratic or leans towards the Democratic Party, while only 27% identify as Republican or lean towards the GOP. And yet, they're often regulated to, at best, a footnote in conversations about national politics. And the article's right. There has been a recorded omission of Asian voters based off things like low voter turnout, less Asian political organizations or nonprofits, language barriers, and a lack of contact with elected officials. However, I think it's important to note how much of these issues are perpetuated by things such as our good old friend, the model minority myth. And what I mean to say by this is that it almost becomes cyclical in nature, the way that Asians are depoliticized. Asians face systematic barriers to voting, and thus don't show up in large numbers. Due to this, the model minority myth of Asians being apolitical or docile in politics is perpetuated, leading to both legislators and social orgs not reaching out to this vastly diverse demographic. And it's a pretty big problem, because Asians, regardless of where they live in the United States or what their particular ethnic group is, live like every other American as part of a constituency, as part of a political voice and a political soul. Thus, if nothing else, the very people with high populations of Asian constituencies, meaning representatives, senators, and elected officials, have a duty to both appeal to these voters and also provide them with the resources that they need. So, with that in mind, why else aren't we voting? The team at Project Voice sat down with Helena Bourbano of the New American Leaders nonprofit in New York City, and according to her, it's based off a lot of different things.
Hi everyone, my name is Helena Bourbano. I am a second-generation Filipina American. Certain identities that I also identify with are Southeast Asian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander, also identify as progressive, and also a intersectional feminist. During the day, I like to say that I work towards a more representative democracy. So I'm the National Political Director at New American Leaders, and that is a nonprofit that is based out of New York City. We work with first and second generation immigrants to run for office. We also train campaign staff and also support elected officials once they're in office. And I am still residing in the lovely Jamaica Plain neighborhood in Boston. I mean, I think that just in general, when we talk about political participation of marginalized communities, there's already a lot of systemic things in place. So talking about the usual voter suppression tactics, like voter ID laws, polling locations being inaccessible or far away, especially if you're in a rural area, gerrymandering, like those are so many things that just naturally affect all marginalized communities. And speaking specifically to the Asian American community, I wish I had some percentages on this, but I remember it being quite high with linguistic isolation, so not having the proper translation services, language barriers, so kind of overcoming just that. So we need more translations available, and without there necessarily having to be like a percentage threshold. So a lot of communities are like, oh, so you're let's just talk about Filipinos, or there has to be X amount that are Filipinos for us to have a multilingual ballot. Like I'd rather just like, let's have good interpretation services available on election day and throughout the whole year. I will not get into my rant about money, but like part of it is it's like, oh, we only have enough money to have one Chinese translator at this polling location, and I'm like, oh Lord.
What Helena is saying has been echoed in many different studies. According to data from the Center for American Progress on Asian Voting, Asian Americans have their roots in more than 20 different countries and dozens of different cultural backgrounds. No one common language exists to unite the group, and there are significant socioeconomic differences between ethnicities. This is why disaggregating Asian data is really important. Furthermore, the article states that as many as 60% of voters prefer language assistance when voting. Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act requires certain jurisdictions to provide such assistance at polling places. However, only 27 jurisdictions in the United States are covered for at least one Asian language. And even in covered jurisdictions, language assistance is not always fully available. Now, that's horrific. However, it's unsurprisingly not the only issue when it comes to Asian turnout. Helena mentioned another key issue, face-to-face contact
as well. So time and time again, studies show that face-to-face contact is imperative in terms of just in engaging folks, generally politically in regards to like being involved in different meetings, but I automatically think of voting. So with voter persuasion as well, to even just get to the poll, like it's a lot of contact, and campaigns don't contact Asian American Pacific Islander communities, because to be quite frank, a lot of it just comes down to money, which is really messed up, because a lot of AAPIs are labeled as not likely voters, and most campaigns tend to spend all of their dollars towards likely voters, and it just costs more for repeated contact. So a lot of this stuff, I personally think, I'm sort of a little bit cynical about it, like the way people just project the image of reaching out to diverse folks, but it's just a photo op. Like they're not actually knocking their doors, right? Or if they're knocking their doors, it's like, oh, that's the subset of the AAPI community that is involved. So we're gonna.
On January 25th, 2017, President Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office in Washington, D.C., and signed one of 3 executive orders to expand deportation efforts and tighten security measures on U.S. immigration. Jump forward almost exactly 3 years later, to the chilly morning of January 15th, 2020. 30 Cambodian Americans are shoved into a plane and deported. Many of them have little to no connection with Cambodia anymore and are being deported based off of past charges of minor crimes. The majority of these individuals also entered the United States as refugees, and these deportations are occurring during the 25th anniversary of Southeast Asian Americans' resettlement in this country. The very next day, January 16th, 2020, marks the 75th day of the hunger strike in Jena, Louisiana, done by South Asian undocumented immigrants being held near the U.S.-Mexico border by ICE agents. They are striking to bring attention to their cases and have been victims of force feeding and brutality from ICE officers. Two different situations, and yet one day apart. Two different stories of Asian political struggles occurring in the same year. Undocumented Asian Americans make up a growing percentage of the population and add to the lack of Asian political involvement. Many are afraid to get involved or disclose their citizenship status, and rightfully so. According to Pew, the four largest Asian undocumented populations are from India, Korea, the Philippines, and China. Between 2007 and 2017, the number of Indian undocumented immigrants in the country alone grew over 60% and consists of about 5% of the total undocumented immigrant population. Additionally, even naturalized Asian citizens faced a general fear about becoming politically involved. Between worries of losing their jobs or citizenship statuses and a lack of understanding around the American political process, many Asians fear to get involved politically, even if it is through legal means. Undocumented Asians are a key demographic in understanding Asian political involvement fully. Stories such as the ones we examined about South and Southeast Asian undocumented detainees are a key reason why Asians should care and furthermore advocate for better immigration policies and rally against fear-mongering surrounding immigration. Also, many Asians come from immigrant backgrounds, as they are the fastest growing both undocumented and documented population on American soil, according to statistics from pewresearch.org. So how do we begin to start fixing the multitude of barriers that lead to low political involvement? Well, we can start by looking at those who are already fighting the good fight, meaning activists and representatives. Representative Judy Chu from California and Pramila Jayapal from Washington are some of the Asian legislators who are not only working to provide representation of Asian voices in politics, but also highlighting important issues that Asians face in the political world today. One of such issues is intergenerational trauma in Asian demographics.
You know, I think about my own family, and they definitely vote in presidentials, but not really politically active. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, like growing up during like martial law, having election rigging, having in their own country, like it's just like, it's hard to put faith in a system in which you grew up with your own political system in your own country, and it was just messed up, you know? So it's kind of hard for that to not trickle over. So I like to say that I give my mom a break sometimes, but actually she's become quite a good voter. It's just important because it just affects our daily lives, like whether or not we're actively thinking about it. And like I mean, I just hate to say it, but a lot of people just don't think about it. Like the stuff that we complain about, like why isn't the stuff on the metro properly labeled, like, right? Why are there fare hikes? Why is there potholes? Why is that street light not working? And then more on the extreme end, if we're talking federal level, it's just like why is fear-mongering going around about immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. And why am I afraid to travel? So that's like more in your face, and we see it with our current president. But then a lot of the other stuff is just everyday life things. Like a lot of us have student loans, or why are there different financial rules and barriers
Mm,
on loans and all of these different things. And this is all decided by government, right?
right.
So it's just important to be active.
When I interview people who I see as an activist, oftentimes, I get like your response, like, "Oh, I personally don't see myself as an activist," or maybe it's something that is not traditionally seen as activism, but I feel like you can redefine it or define it in like so many other ways, and I don't know. It's not a like a question for me to answer either, but it's an interesting observation. But like, also, I just wanted to say I admire you, like knowing that you've come so far in this game, like the politics game, and any other competitive field of industry that's predominantly white, like in the corporate America in general. Like, it's like, how do you insert yourself in this world as a person of color, as a woman of color?
Exactly. How do we insert ourselves into the world as people of color? Many of you may know that in addition to studying political science, I also studied environmental science. And as someone who has worked in this field, I can tell you that it's one of the most white dominated fields I've ever seen.
So, hi, my name is Cece Horvat. I'm from Albany, New York. I am now studying at the School for Environmental Sustainability at the University of Michigan, and I'm an environmental justice major. Oh, I also identify with the identities of an Asian adoptee from China. A lot of like different non-white cultures are like very used to different ways of preserving the environment, or also just being really like thrifty and smart about how we use our resources. For example, like families that save their plastic bags and like plastic Tupperware and reuse it, like little things like that. Just being aware of your consumption habits are super like helpful in a way to start. And even if you are jumping on the trends of like using a reusable straw, or bringing your plates and silverware, like those are all really small acts, and that's okay. Like it does start at an individual level, because it starts with your consciousness and being aware of those things and constantly being able to educate yourself and understand those things. How can a plastic straw connect back to, inequitable access to parks? It doesn't necessarily connect. You can find ways that it connects. In terms of like, how do we fix the world's problems in one question? Like we can't. It has to do with education, self-awareness, and also understanding that this does impact everyone, and we all deserve a like safe and happy place that gives us what we need, and the earth does that, so we need to respect it in the best way that we can.
That's Cece Horvat, a student studying sustainability in Michigan. The team at Project Voice also had a chance to talk about environmental justice with her. And what she says here is a very powerful thing, because it really shows one way in which people of color, and particularly Asians, have a unique connection to the environmental and climate fight. Even just for me, as a Desi person, she got me thinking about Desis putting water in their emptying soap dispensers to make them last longer, or the wads of plastic bags within plastic bags that we accumulate over time. Seriously, if you ever need plastic bags, don't buy them. Hit up your Asian friends. There's the plot of a new Inception film waiting for you in the form of plastic bags building up under some random bathroom sink in their house. I guarantee it. Okay, jokes aside, the resourcefulness in the Asian community is a real thing. I was watching this page about Great Depression cooking, meaning stories of people from the Great Depression and how they cook different meals. And the host was sort of talking about how in the Great Depression they used to like turn off the stove and let food finish cooking to sort of save gas and save energy and cut costs. And I was like, whoa, we still do that. Like, it's a very Desi thing to do that. And it's when I made that connection, I realized in many ways the way in which Asians are environmentally friendly has to do directly with economics, and in other ways, it's a cultural ethic of conservation. So, why do we look at these other countries as these huge polluters that are terrible for the environment and terrible for people? Well, part of it is that there are so few people of color in these fields to correct these huge misconceptions. And in order to fully get involved in the fight for climate justice, because it is such a white space, we need to remember that it is through a political lens. Which is why, by telling stories of people who are in politics and seeing faces of Asian legislators and being vocal about who we are, is very important. It's a concept that one of the hosts from Project Voice, Jess, stated pretty well.
You made a really good point about trying to make the personal as political. Personal becoming political, and it's like we often, or people who originally aren't politically active, they often associate politics as something that's like very big and dramatic and, you know, unnecessarily like, you know, serious or dramatic, but it isn't. It like affects so many little things in our life, little but very important things in our life, like you said, about you know, infrastructure, college loans. Oh my gosh, don't get me started on college loans. Things like that. Just like how do you code switch so that like people understand like it on their level, like in their own lives, and like just putting it into context. Yeah,
Contextualizing it. Maybe that's where the answer lies. I often say this on Model Minority. We don't have all the answers. Perhaps much of what we do in spaces such as Project Voice and Model Minority is to bring the issues and discussions to you, and in a way try to contextualize them so others can understand perhaps a little bit better the struggle of someone else. But I think what we can continue to do, in the political realm at least, is to grow. By uplifting voices and telling our stories, we grow as a community and as a collective. And that's why, as always, I'm grateful to have you here, because you listening and engaging with these stories while reaching out to tell your own is what makes us so politically inimitable. Well, that brings me to the end of today's episode. A very, very special shout out to Jess, Cece, Helena, and everyone over at Project Voice. The work that you do continues to inspire those like me to create and collaborate. Give us a follow on Facebook at the same name as this podcast, Model Minority Uniquely American, as well as at Project Voice. And as always, shukriya, thanks for listening, and I'm really glad to have you here.